on the Dynasty front from a busy wildcard weekend in the NFL playoffs. That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, we have almost every single team, every single game had quarterback news. I wanted to actually lead in and throw it to you about Brock Purdy. Is it getting serious now? He didn't have the greatest first half. They won. They might continue to win. Brock Purdy is one that really melts my brain in terms of if I do straight analysis of his career start versus some of the just natural tendencies we know about low pedigree options.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been thinking about with the low pedigree options is like, hey, seventh rounders never really start. Seventh rounders usually don't get an opportunity to play, right? Like, so already you're sort of cleared the initial threshold of, can you get on the field, which is very difficult for low pedigree players, generally, even more so for quarterbacks. So I think automatically the fact that he's gotten out there, he's gotten to play, that puts him in a different sphere of just evaluating him as a seventh round quarterback. Listen, I think that Shanahan's scheming him up, right? And I think that Shanahan could probably train an orangutan to throw for 8 yards an attempt. Right? We've seen that consistently throughout his career. That said, I think Purdy's showing pretty well. It's a fascinating decision. Like this is going to be the off season of fascinating quarterback decisions, from Seattle to Detroit to San Francisco to the Jets, like Derek Carr, right? Like up and down, like what these teams are going to do. It's all over the place. Like it's really interesting. I mean, Washington even made news this week about potentially being in on Sam Howell for next year, which
and Lamar Jackson might have been one of the biggest guys who didn't even play, and yet he overtook the news cycle for some cross section.
Right.
Brady
potentially being on the move. Like it's all of like it's a fascinating. And I think we can learn a lot from Dynasty, talking about him, thinking about him, like reading about him. I think it's going to be really fascinating offseason.
Yeah, Brock Purdy is one that it feels like no matter where you put him, he's the type that you can't actually get right, because it's pretty binary. If you get to week 1 and they say Trey Lance, that's been fun, that's been nice, and either he's not starting on the same depth chart as Brock Purdy, or if they move Trey Lance, then the outcome, you're too low on Brock Purdy today. And yet, if he goes back to a backup, they tap him on the head. They said, Brock, great job. You got us to the NFC Championship game. You got us to the Super Bowl. Whatever the outcome is, but he's going to ultimately go back into the cupboard, go back into the pocket of backup quarterback land. Then right now, you probably have him too high. So that's the tough thing for me as someone that does the Dynasty trade calculator, someone that you have to do the minutia of value. And I can't just put him in this, well, he's interesting, kind of bucket, because that really isn't descriptive. So he's a real tough one for me in terms of you look, and when you filter out first round quarterbacks, what he's done over 5, 6, 7 game sample now is meaningful enough to say almost all these guys, even the bad case scenarios of washing out, still basically started the following year. But how many of those going back in time had Trey Lance or a top 5 pick on the roster? I mean, the twists and turns and storylines for San Francisco and the fact that they are one of the elite contenders this year is just so many things converging. And like you said, I mean, Brock Purdy, you said a trained monkey is probably 7.5, 8 yards per attempt in that offense. Guys are running free. Like they're running to spring break out of elementary school, just running for the bus, and they cannot be stopped. So I find Brock Purdy fascinating because we have seen a bunch of fall off guys at QB 20 plus. We just don't feel as good about, and yet we have Purdy playing well.
Yeah, and you get to a spot where you start looking at some of these guys, and you're like, all right, like it becomes a really interesting conversation, and. I keep going back to Lance. Like when they drafted Lance, they were kind of taking an upside swing. It's tough to really know what they had.
They didn't commit all the way though. They kept Garoppolo always on that team. They drafted Purdy, and now obviously with injury, they're playing him as well.
Right. And even it got so far as to this offseason, there had been concerns all throughout about his preparation. And then, it was a fait accompli that Jimmy Garoppolo was going to be gone, right? They basically banished him, and he didn't even know the offensive coordinator. And then all of a sudden they rework the contract and bring him back, right? What did that signal to us about Trey Lance? Well, there's a lot that you could potentially infer from that. Now Lance is in a position to be Wally pipped, and you're like, well, is this what, that's a really interesting situation, because there's a chance that Purdy goes to the Super Bowl, right? There's a chance that he goes to a conference like this doesn't happen, And so I guess the other thing that I would say is if you get to a spot where that happens, right, is there another team in the marketplace for him? Right. It would be hard to believe that a team like Washington or a team, I don't know, like a bunch of other teams that are sort of in no man's land at quarterback wouldn't watch what is happening with Brock Purdy and say, hey, we can do that, right? Even if they can't, right? No one can do what Kyle Shanahan does offensively, but even if they can't, could convince themselves they could and be interested in paying, kind of like a Matt Castle type price for a guy like Brock Purdy, right? We could see a scenario where that happens. And, I think I think he's going to get more opportunities, whether it's there or someplace else. I do think there'll be bidders for his services.
Yeah, and right now you look at his touchdown interception rate and ratio there. You look at a lot of his ancillary data, and it's like, well, at some point you have to say, like you said, updating priors and saying, okay, 7th round, that means something, but it doesn't mean as much as it meant a few months ago. Is the basic thing. You're updating it. You're saying you still don't have to value him like he's Patrick Mahomes doing this, which is pretty much what I looked at first 4 or 5 starts, and he's basically the only one that's unequivocally better than Brock Purdy at this point over the last 15, 20 years. I have him at QB 32, and I think that's a hedge because I could argue he could be 5, 6, 7 spots higher just based on he's playing well. It's a position that there's 20 to 30 at any given time that are decent plus in the world. In terms of projecting them NFL wise. And right now he's one of them. So at worst, is he Gardner Minshew? At worst, is he someone that you go, he's going to be one of the most interesting backups in the NFL as a worst case. So that's kind of where I sit. I could see him in the mid-20s. I could also see him if you're saying pedigree matters. You got a top first round pick there. Who knows who comes back or who is added with the whims of the 49ers in the offseason going into next year. So I think that somewhere in the mid-20s to mid-30s is kind of that zone, depending on how bullish or bearish you are on Purdy.
So what's super interesting to me is when you go back and you look at Trey Lance's career. Like
he has a career. It's very short. It's
a very dating back to 2017. He's had an alarmingly low amount of snaps. So he's got 102 career
and he came out young. So lack of experience from a lesser level of competition in college, and I mean he just ran roughshod at Dakota. And then now you're saying he's hardly played in the NFL as well. But yet, Jordan, we're talking about rushing pays the bills at quarterback. So if he's allowed to play and run, we know what that can lead to fantasy wise. So it's a really interesting, but I still think he's too high, right? He's in the top 15 or so. When has the allegiance been there?
He has 420 passing attempts since 2017.
Is that a lot?
420. By the way, Brock Purdy this year has 170.
Yeah, if he goes to the Super Bowl, he might get within
more than it's going to be
distance.
It's going to be close, right? Yeah. So I think when you think about what you don't know about Trey Lance and what you know a lot more in the NFL.
Purdy played a lot of starts in college.
Exactly. Yes. And so and there's some that's even if he wasn't necessarily great in college, that knowledge, right? That sort of experiential, dealing with the ups and downs.
Almost the Bill Parcells. What do I need to see from a quarterback profile? Someone like Brock Purdy would be appealing in terms of experience, getting some wins, elevating your program, all those types of factors.
Yeah, exactly.
The one thing that bothers me though is I don't think the fantasy ceiling is overly high. I mean, the way I looked at it, maybe he touches low QB1. But he's probably more of a QB2 type. So this whole discussion can also boil down to, is the ups, because I've seen trades, we're going to talk about one, in the next segment, but I think he's traded for second round picks probably pretty fluidly this offseason before we have more information. But it's an interesting thing of, does he have the upside to warrant being super sticky with him? Because even if he is a starter, what does that mean? When he's competing against the big boys that are running around a legitimate amount, guys that have been playing 5 to 10 years, all those types of profiles that he would be battling in season for productivity rankings.
Yeah. I think it's it's all about the costs you want to pay, right? Or about the costs that you're going to be asked to pay. And I think that's right. like you start looking around, like there's seconds being thrown around from him, like in the past, like couple of months. He's used as basically a package piece. There's some fourths and fifths and thirds sort of thrown at him. There's him for a third, right? I think that the upside, like that's a really good upside play, would be my opinion. Okay. So those sorts of things, right? I think it's a balance, right? If the moment ever strikes where you can get a first for him, you got to cash out. Right, but if you're gonna, if it's a late contender second or a third, right, then the odds tip in your favor of like, hey, I could potentially land it. I could go bust. I could go bust with that pick, but I could also get a starting quarterback in a really good system, right? And I think that the consequences of this aren't just in quarterback play. I mean, George Kittle was a league changing player with Brock Purdy at quarterback, right? League changing player, and that has consequences for us, right? I'm as in on George Kittle as any tight end that is in the league, from having him on my teams. That has consequences, right? It has consequences for Ayuk. It has consequences for Debo, right? Are we going to re-rack it with Trey Lance and we don't know what we have as a passer, right? All of those things are going to persist over the summer, or we kind of know what we've got with Brock Purdy and we're going to move forward, right?
And you notated those weapons, right? I mean, that's arguably, I haven't done a brass tacks list, but that's arguably the best collection of skill position weapons around a quarterback right now. So the quarterback,
it might be the best collection of them in recent memory. Yes.
So the quarterback, paint by number, don't screw it up, throw to the giant wide open lumbering gazelle that's in the open field. Do that, and you're probably going to throw 2 touchdowns a game at least, and you're going to throw for 2 something, if not more. And let's roll in, because one of the dynasty trading segment ones is Brock Purdy for 210. It is a 10-team league and 2 quarterbacks, so it's mandatory, but yet we're seeing 20 quarterbacks in lineups per week, and that's obviously probably one of the strongest teams in the league there if they earned 210. So 20 overall. How does that kind of sit with you? You already kind of alluded to the fact if it's a later second and you're banking on the fact that there's upside there with him becoming a future starter and that probability.
I mean, just go back and like think about how you would put like Jordan Love in this equation, right? Like, how would you think about Jordan Love sort of at that point? Well, you would say like, hey, there's a chance, he would have gone before that, right? You would have said, well, I got to kind of stash him for a while and we'll see sort of what happens with Aaron Rodgers. And you would say, okay, well, we've gotten this far basically in Jordan Love's career and we still don't know where he is, right? They're going to maybe have to extend a 5th-year option to him without him really playing any substantial time, right? That's a very interesting team building decision for them. I think clearly I would take Purdy in this situation, would sort of be my thought, right? Because again, I always think about when you hear 210, I think I put that in terms of what the asset's going to be. So all I think about is 210, hoping day 2 running back, right? Hoping day 2 running back, hoping early, hoping second round tight end, right? That's what is in my mind thinking about it. It's not going to be a first round wide receiver typically. So it's that. So you come back and you say, all right, well, what of these things is replaceable, right? I can get a lot of backup running backs in a lot of different ways. Very unlikely that I'm going to get a starting quarterback, a what I think is a reasonable shot as we sit here right now for a 2023 starting quarterback at 210. Like that's never going to happen. And so I think you take that swing right now. I would do that right now.
And in 10-team, unless you're talking 30+ man rosters, that you're going to have plenty of looks at running back off the waiver wire. So you drafting one at 210 or 307 or 402 versus the waiver wire, staying flexible, you're going to fill that roster spot now, replace it in July, replace it in August, replace it in week 2. You're going to keep doing that, with that, say, running back spot. But if Purdy slots into your, say, top 4 quarterbacks in a 2 quarterback mandatory, you, like you said, you've got outs to be a starter. Worst case, you've got a guy that's actually proven. And I would hearken Gardner Minshew as one that we've seen good play from him across a decent sample size as an NFL starter. And so that type of profile, there's not that many. There's not that many that hang around, linger, and are decent or decent plus. And the decent plus applies to 2 guys like that. And right now, Brock Purdy running with that job. I wanted to ask another quarterback, because we always talk about, profile hunting and finding discounts, but maybe not going in the bargain bin, QB 20 plus. There's value in the first round of startups. There's value with profiles that are just a little bit different. We talked about how last offseason, Mahomes a little gettable, right? I mean, I think I got him at QB 3 in one startup draft, not going 101 in every single one. That's a little bit of a discount for an all-timer profile. How about Justin Herbert? How about all the things going on with the Chargers? He's starting to slip in the dynasty market a little bit. And we love to build around strong quarterbacks, a couple of them if we can. But I'm thinking, I haven't seen a bunch of startups yet. It's early, but Herbert might be one you miss out on the top. Maybe you don't get a trade up. Maybe you do get a trade up. You still take Herbert somewhere in the mid-round one, where you might have had to be at 103 religiously last off season. And now he's a few spots later. You have a little more option to get him.
I mean, you got the quarterback that's hit 3 straight times to start his career, right? You've got all the physical attributes. You got a top 6 seasonal finish. That's a wheels up profile, right? And this is a situation like this is last year, and he's not as high as this, right? Mahomes is a different, right? He doesn't have human DNA. We could cut him open and test his blood, and then I could maybe believe that he's actually has human DNA. I think he's a cyborg. I think Herbert's officially a human, and he isn't quite to that level. But what becomes totally apparent in Dynasty to me, the more I play it, the more I play Superflex, like you have to be in when these guys sort of slide a little bit in price.
Embrace the tarnish. Embrace the tarnish. Be willing to put that silver polish on them. And it doesn't QB5. I think you might see some startup drafts with him at 6. Maybe 7 in the QB, depending on the direction people go. And that to me is a relief, because I remember previous years, you might have the names at the top, and then the next name of interest might be late first round, early second. But now if you're sitting there, I'm at 106 in the startup draft order, you might say, I'm sitting right here. I'm zoned in, and I think Herbert's going to be there. I might try to do other things, but just having that solidity of saying, I think there's a really good probability he's there, because again, this Chargers collapse and the fact that I can call right back to how many snaps, how many passes did he have with his full complement? All 3 receivers, Gerald Everett, Austin Eckler. He really didn't have a full slate. Now, other teams didn't either. But, I mean, like you just said, he's a strong hit quarterback to begin. He's in his prime, physical attributes, rushing upside that we really haven't even seen much. But he can do it. I mean, he could put up big numbers anytime. But the great thing is he's protecting himself, and he's probably going to have, durability, positivity in his future, as opposed to some other quarterbacks that might be a little more reckless, but yet they're putting up big or bigger rushing numbers.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't pretend to be a scheme expert, but a lot of smart people tell me that the offense that they were running wasn't emphasizing what some of the physical capabilities that Justin Herbert offers, right? So they fire their offensive coordinator. They're going to reset that. I think bringing back Brandon Staley is the right call. I think Brandon Staley is a good coach, and I think that I think that his demise this season was actually caused by I think they probably told him to rein in his aggressiveness, and I think that cost him this game. Right. I think if he had gone for it on 4th down in like 1 of 3 situations, they would have advanced, but they didn't. And now they're home, but he's still their coach. So it's funny because if you fail conservatively, it's not as dangerous as if you fail like being aggressively and actually it being plus EV to go for it, but you fail. Right. That's the thing that kills you. It's funny. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to probably be some changes they need to address. I think their offensive skill positions again, right? They have to kind of look past what Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, like this generation of the offense, they sort of have to look for the future. And I would imagine that they're going to be in the market for drafting someone as well. So yeah, I mean, I think, a better offensive scheme probably helps him. There was some stuff too that I saw today that they had the most perfectly covered plays against them, which is almost always an indication of offensive scheme. Right. So you sort of look at some of these things.
It's what they've been saying about the Packers. Packers offense, where it was Davante Adams go win, and he
Yes.
can. So but then they transpose that to 2022, and all of a sudden you have a new cast of characters, and you don't have Davante Adams, and all of a sudden everything bogs down because
Correct.
everyone's not going out and winning
Correct.
for a 40% market share.
Yes.
One of the best comments I saw from following the Football Guys comments on the wild card weekend here on the staff was from Adam Harstead, and he made this comment to our next quarterback we'll discuss, which is, it's almost like a full season of priors is better than and more accurate than a 4-week prior sample size. And that was alluding to Dallas, but it was also alluding to Dak Prescott, the Cowboys offense in general. And Jordan, I don't know how you do this, because I was really looking forward to maybe an exit. We'll see how things go with Dallas, but maybe not as electric of a game. Dak, can you keep it just under control a little bit? Because I feel like some of the profit potential for Dak and startups this offseason are just going away. We saw a more dynamic, more involved, more his usual self, Michael Gallup, which was nice. You saw multiple tight ends involved, and it just felt like Dallas played more like 2 months ago than limping through the late season run here.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, it's funny because someone was comping Derek Carr to Dak Prescott over the weekend, and I was like mortally offended. When you look at it, like
career QB2 guy,
right,
can't really compare to Dak, right?
Right, and you look at offenses for Derek Carr in his career. I think he's posted 2 top 10 offenses, and they were like 6 and 9.
Dak lives there. Dak is getting mail. He has a
right.
PO
He's
box
got 4
directly
of them,
there. Yeah,
right. He's got 4 of them in a shorter career. So, and it's funny. I actually Tej Seth on Twitter tweeted this out, and I just cracked up laughing reading it. Most total points expected added, so EPA, right, the NFL version of EPA, in a playoff game since 2006. Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott, and then actually Patrick Mahomes again in that Bills game last year. So Dak Prescott basically the 4th best game in terms of expected points added since 2006. I was told he lacks ceiling, Chad. I don't know. I mean, that seems like a pretty good ceiling to me. I mean, number 1 overall offense. Right? How many guys have done that are walking around? The list is not that many. And there's people going ahead of him that I don't think can sniff that. Right. So all of these things that you point to him, it's an underrated profile, and so I'm excited I'm a Dak guy, right? Like I like Dak Prescott. I've liked the profile for a while. I thought he's been underpriced. He's probably still going to be underpriced, right? So that's fine, right? And just to see him play well is good. I don't think it's going to change his price too much. Like people are going to be still putting Justin Fields over him because he's got more ceiling. Right? That's going to happen just because that's how dynasties play.
Yeah, and by my adjusted points per game finish measures, he's been top 13 every single year. So while he hasn't been QB1 or 2 in a typical in any particular season, he's hit top 6 a bunch. He's been basically top 12 guy, lock and load every single year, coming from day 3. And what I've said is, we've said CeeDee Lamb, there's something to be desired there from a true build the passing game around him. I think that they're probably going to add to wide receiver. Independent, it'd be nice if Michael Gallup, continued this momentum into 2023. That would be great. But even if Dalton Schultz is gone, I don't think the downgrade to Jake Ferguson or otherwise is going to be substantial within that offense. Mm-hmm. And so I really think things are looking up for Dak. And what I love is, and we've said this before, young, when he started out rushing a bunch, added, a ton of red zone touchdowns, but he's transitioning now. I think he's going to be 30 for 2023, transitioning to being more of a passer. You keep hearing reports about how well he navigates the line of scrimmage, all the things you want to hear from a veteran quarterback getting to the veteran portion of his career, that you still want rushing. He still provides that. He can do that any given week. However, you need to pay the bills, like Greg Cosell says, from the pocket, navigating when everyone knows you're going to pass. And you need to navigate pressure, timing, rhythm of the offense, of the play, of the defense, and everything. So I feel like he's the perfect blend of all of those things, but we're putting him into a package that is right around QB 10, something like that in terms of price, which is, that's probably going to leak to round 2 of startups, which is pretty exciting when you say Dak Prescott can be my second quarterback of a build.
Yeah. That's an all-in type scenario. And again, Herbert, this is the season of last year. I thought I was putting together my tiers, right, my hierarchy of assets just this week. And I was looking at it. I was like, I'm like, these are like way off. Like there's some weird spot. I'm like looking at it and I was like, there's some weirdness going on in terms of how these last year, I thought it was pretty efficient, right? Like it wasn't super, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of outliers. I thought the market was pretty close to what we thought in terms of, generally speaking. There's some specific spots, but there's some weird stuff going on now. But there's some really good opportunities on guys like on Prescott. If Herbert slips, that's great. Taking a discount on Kyler Murray with the year off, right? You can blend him with one of these older quarterbacks, him and Brady make a good pairing if Brady comes back, right? That makes a lot of sense as sort of as a quarterback option. If you go quarterback in the first 2 rounds and Kyler Murray's the second one, right? Something like that. Like there's a lot of these interplays that are going on this offseason that I don't think have been present in the past, which is interesting because as a game, you would think Superflex would get more efficient as we play it. There appears to be, and again, it's early in the offseason, so maybe all this stuff hasn't sort of washed itself out yet, and so the efficiencies haven't fully formed, but there appears to be some mistakes going on in some of the profile stuff, which is like a printing press for us.
Love it. Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 137 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. And it's a 12-month season, which means you can sign up anytime over at Football Guys with that Dynasty content. We've got major plans for off-season content, which years ago pretty much went silent from Super Bowl to picking up around the NFL draft. That's not going to be the case. You got drafts going on. You've got Dynasty trading going on. And that means Dynasty content at Football Guys is going to be flowing, as well as the great content once we get into the red zone, the green zone there as we get July through the end of the season. So you want to give us credit, say that the Dynasty Show sent you, and that's footballguys.com/dynasty winners.
Hey, can we talk about one more quarterback before we do Dynasty trades?
Yes.
So there are people that exist that I've seen both on Twitter and heard in podcasts that wanted to compare Daniel Jones and call him Josh Allen 2.0. And I just want to know what type of examination of these people that we need to do, because that is crazy. When you look at Daniel Jones, to me, he
ran some QB powers this weekend, Jordan.
He has Joe Flacco's, this is Joe Flacco's contract season. It's Joe Flacco's contract season written all over it. That's exactly what it is. And not to say that he can't be better or sort of grow, and I'm sure the offense is nice, but the problem with Daniel Jones is you're going to have to pay him. And the complaint that everyone has right now is that he doesn't have a supporting cast. But you want to know what? When you pay Daniel Jones $30 million, you want to know what you're not going to be able to do is pay a supporting cast. And what you might say to that,
they paid the cast. They paid Kenny Galladay, Jordan. That was their choice.
But here's the best part, right? You might say that, hey, Jordan,
they flushed Evan Ingram and they brought in Kenny Galladay.
You're going to pay Kenny Galladay. You're not going to pay him anymore. You're going to cut him, and then you can put that money towards something. You want to know what that is? That money's going to go towards? It's going to go towards paying Daniel Jones. So you haven't even netted anything more towards him, a supporting cast or anything like that. Then you're going to have to lock up Barkley, right? If you want to bring back Barkley, you're going to have to lock him up for more money. And then all of a sudden, the exact problem that you have right now is the problem that you're going to face going forward, which is they don't have perimeter, reliable, high quality outside weapons, right? Which is exactly the situation that they could find themselves falling directly into this offseason. So I find that one to be pretty interesting. Like when you look, he's still in his career has not thrown in a season for more than 7 yards an attempt. He still has not done that. We've been through 4 years.
Career high, like 15 touchdowns as well.
15 touchdowns, right?
Dreadfully low. Yeah.
He had twice as many turnover-worthy plays this year, more than twice as many than he has big-time throws. Right? When you look at it, he has like the lowest.
And that's horrific. And that's horrific, by the way. Yeah, right. Doing that ratio of big-time throws to turnover-worthy. I mean, that's a death knell. You sound a little salty because they snatched away Isaiah Hodgins from Buffalo.
They did. Yeah. Wide receiver 1, Isaiah Hodgins.
Look at that. Exactly.
Little did we know. We thought that maybe there were people that thought that Isaiah McKenzie was going to put Gabe Davis in the fantasy purgatory, where there's people thought Cole Beasley, Khalil Shakir. Little did we know it was Isaiah Hodgins, and for some reason he got run out of town, right? He got run out of town, so good on Gabe Davis.
Friend of the show, Gabe Davis.
Gabe Davis is actually in the chat tonight, Gabe Davis.
Giants fans can thank Gabe Davis, basically, for making it so he was expendable.
Yes.
Expendable.
Gabe Davis's shadow is looming large over this playoffs on both the AFC and NFC side.
The Bills could basically have 2 teams in the Super Bowl if the Giants go with Isaiah Hodgins. We're going all the way. Making this a quarterback-centric trading segment here. We already talked about Brock Purdy. How about Jalen Hurts? So we've got FFPC. We've got throttling down with your roster spots in the next few weeks here. So we got Jalen Hurts in a start 1, plus 108, plus 308 for 101.
You got to take 101 in the format. But you have, it
doesn't matter who you have at quarterback or who Hurts is upgrading, right?
Right.
Take 101, sit there, bird dog seat.
They don't, they're not that much different, right? You can figure out a way to get.
You can trade a second or a third for a quarterback that has decent upside, right?
Absolutely.
This is not the most difficult market or the most difficult kiddie pool to swim around in and keep your head above water. Yeah,
we have an ongoing segment about this, right? We have an ongoing talking.
We're going to start a new one. Did I get enough for 101? Selling this early in the offseason. Did I get enough?
Right. I have a Mahomes one. We'll have to throw in at the end, by the way.
Exactly. 17 first. Did I get enough? They're all 112. Projected 112 all the way through 2030. All right. Final one. We've got Kyler Murray and 1 quarterback on the move. Lesser of a price than the previous trade, which is Alec Pierce and 111.
So this one's interesting because you're probably going to lose Kyler for a year, and I'd be curious about the profile.
The Kyler Murray we know.
Correct.
For a year, right?
Yeah. So the interesting part is like, what, how does that fit? I'd be interested to know roster size and all of those things in terms of like what type of burden that puts on. Is this a 16-team league where you're going to have to hold him throughout the entire offseason, right? Or is it a 16 roster spot? Or is this a deeper one where you got some flexibility, right? So those things would be interesting, I think, to know. You don't usually get first for quarterbacks in this format, right? I would be interested in a profile other than Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce to me is like a discount version of George Pickens. And I don't say that in a loving way. So I'd be interested to know, can you do something different at that cost? But this is a good juxtaposition against the Hurts thing, right? Like you look at the Hurts deal and you think, okay, that's a 101 for him. Or I could, how do you sort of recreate that? Well, you go out and you pay 111 for Kyler Murray and you just be patient, right? Maybe you get Brady, right? You sort of do it in the aggregate and you say, all right, like I've got 80-90% of Jalen Hurts by going a lot later in the draft. Like I think those two as a blend together make a ton of sense.
But also, we say this a few times a year. You float your third out there. Could you get Aaron Rodgers? Could you also just wait? It's a start 1. Mm-hmm. How many teams have 2 guys that are better than your guy? If you're really light, if you're the weakest at quarterback, and let's hope Kyler Murray is a graphic upgrade to the position. You're giving 111. You're losing that flexibility for all trading between now and that pick being on and expiring off the clock. So, and I'm just not a Kyler fan. And you add in the fact, again, average NFL passer. How many more data points? I'm fine changing my opinion, changing my analysis, but Kyler Murray has to show me something different to actually assess him differently. And now you're saying you're going to have him operate either for part of this year or most of this year, or as you said, maybe a fraction of this year without his usual roadrunner mobility and rushing upside. What does that look like? DeAndre Hopkins probably gone. They haven't really used Rondale Moore super well. What's Zach Ertz? Is he going to be back? What does he look like? The weapons are not quite as good. And Marquise Brown, more of an ancillary guy. So are those really as good? If Kyler Murray is largely not running and this year is almost a wash from the upside we know, why are you paying it now? Why are you getting it? This is not a super flex trade where you gave 111 for Kyler Murray.
Right.
Different discussion. You're playing the long game. I think that's a great idea, maybe to go profile hunting, because now they're like, I don't know when he's going to play. I don't know how he's going to look. And so you start ambulance chasing and you can get a discount, but that's not what this is. And that's not the format for it. So pretty quizzical on that one. Like you said, Alec Pierce, get something, if you're on the other side of this, get something different, because Alec Pierce just blends into your backdrop of potential upside to a destination. We don't even, where's the stop on that subway track? Wide receiver 30? I don't know what that means. So
yeah. Hey, I got a Mahomes one for you. You ready?
Yes, I am ready.
All right. Which side do you prefer in Dynasty? 102, 106, 109, and 112, or Patrick Mahomes?
Well, you didn't at least have 101 in there, so I'm going to take Patrick Mahomes pretty easily.
Right.
Because there's only one of him. And I figure I can replicate some stuff that you would take with those picks or whatever a different way. So
right, 4 mortals versus 1 immortal, and you're taking the immortal guy.
Was that a poll? What was the result?
It was a poll. Do you want to guess what the market said?
I'll go 61% Mahomes.
You like read these and then
no, I haven't.
Round a little bit.
Jordan, I blocked you on Twitter. I just needed an opportunity to tell you this. I don't feel good about it, but
yeah, well, that's something. We'll have to discuss.
I actually
that
blocked
offline.
the key term Jordan on Twitter. So it was the country, it was you, it was a few other people.
Any
Michael
quotes
Jordan.
of me?
It's pros and cons of what I can and cannot see on Twitter now.
Got it. 62.8%. Wow. 1,676 votes, by the way.
Chad the guesser. Chad the guesser. I was off. You really do think I cheat, don't you? I don't even know.
What would you need to add to this to take the other side?
Well, can you give me something that's actually a
Herbert?
thing?
Like Herbert plus
well, I said minimum you need to give me 101 in there.
Okay.
If are we using just picks?
I mean what,
instead of the
like
late
if you could
first,
pick
give me
another
a first
asset,
next year.
what would it be?
Oh, well,
like,
we said before to make it doable. I mean, and this is we've said before, if you're in a bad spot, you got Mahomes and not a whole lot else, you're like, deep lineups. We've already said build around Mahomes and figure the other stuff out. But if you were going to do it the other method, I mean, if you were going to get Dak and like 3 firsts, that's something of a conversation. That's something that we can sell. We can argue for that. So that's the type of thing. It needs to be a quarterback high enough, but one that's discounted enough to actually get some tangible picks alongside. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think the only one where I didn't take Mahomes in the last year has been it was like an Allen Mahomes deal. And I was like looking at it and I was like, okay, like I could see doing it was like some sort of contract like that. Like it was like a weird deal where I was like, it's actually 2 elite quarterbacks. It might have been Herbert. It was one of those 2 guys where it was like a lot on the other side of it where like, okay, I can see doing that. But other than having because it's just so hard to get them. Like it's so hard to get them. And you're just giving, right? Even if you were to give the 3 later picks and give him for Herbert, then would you take Herbert in 102 for Mahomes? I think you still take the Mahomes side of that. So to even sort of go back and recreate it, it's tough to ever come out ahead. And it's wild. Some of the quotes in there were it matters team direction. I was like, that is absolutely the wrong take. That's a loser's take on Dynasty. If it matters the team direction, that's how you end up in a perpetual team build. You never do this because then you never end up in that spot.
Right. Yeah. I've said before, the stories of I started a team and a lot went wrong, but I had Mahomes and my worst result is being the first team out of the playoffs. Right. That was my worst result through 4 years.
Floor raiser, and he's a ceiling raiser. He'll just drag you. So if he's a 2 warp guy rolling out of bed. Yeah. And the consequence of that is I was going through some stuff where I'm writing some team build stuff for the team building guide. And I'm just I'm looking through it and I'm I made a ton of mistakes, in some specific spots.
But just like NFL, he fixes the mistakes for you.
It's like making 17 threes in a game. You're going to win. It's just, it's really hard to
or you're plus 11 threes over the NBA opponent, right? I mean, Absolutely. What are the odds you lose that game in today's,
super small, right? And he just has such an ability to drag you. I mean, I did it and I actually looked at it. I missed, I think on average, 4 games. I had only 3 of my top 10 picks, Gabe Davis, Josh Jacobs, and Patrick Mahomes, actually play the entire season. I think I missed on average 4 guys for the rest of the season. I had to get a bye, right? That's how far they dragged me. It was him and Jacobs dragged me so far, right? Just the edge that they gave you, and a lot of other fixing pieces around them. It's amazing how one elite player can just change your reality, right? And then you're just trying to get him away. You can never. Right. The goal is to get elite players, right? The goal is not to rebuild with elite players. I used the metaphor and I kind of butchered it, I think a couple of weeks ago, but you build a fire, right? When you're building a fire, you build it from the bottom, right? You start taking all the stuff out of the bottom first. You don't set the top on fire, you build the bottom so that way it burns up, right? You don't start tearing stuff down from the top, right? It's just a terrible, terrible idea. And you lose all your fuel that way.
Excellent. Yeah. And on that note, so I imagine your reaction to this, which is one of the quotes from the Footballguys Dynasty Forum this week. I hate buying top of the market prices. Don't usually make the first 2 to 3 picks in a startup either for similar reasons.
Now is the exact time to move up in a draft. If you go back and you start look at some of your drafts from last year, like look at some of the ADP early on, what you'll see is like so much of the middle rounds gets hurt by free agency. It gets hurt by changing landscape stuff. It gets hurt by the draft. People get caught, different quarterbacks change, right? All of that stuff sort of happens in the middle or later parts of the draft. It doesn't happen to elite players.
But you losing, like the thing that hit me was you start looking back at these drafts and you're like, well, if it costs to move up from 104 to 101 to get Mahomes or Allen or whatever, like to get yourself to a new hierarchy of limited alien assets that NFL and Dynasty are hard to replicate, hard to find. Good luck. We will give you a bunch of rookie picks. You try to find the next one. Good job. Yes. I don't know how many it'll take. So, but if you have to move down from like round 3 to round 7 to move up those, 3, 4, 5 spots or whatever, it's not going to affect you pretty much at all.
It's like free. That's like a free move up. That's such
keep
a
trying to do
tier.
it. Keep trying to do it. And we see 101 traded so much in startup drafts, right? I mean, it's the appealing spot. I'm going to get a haul. I'm going to get 2, 3 things. And we're not talking about trading, 107, 212, a future first, a future second. Like we're not like, it doesn't even take that much. Mm-hmm. There were times in the past it might have, and we saw trades like that, but it does not take that. And I just think it's cheaper than ever to move up, get your guy, tier jump, and just insulate yourself, as you've mentioned 3 or 4 different ways, aptly so, that's the way you can insulate yourself from ever being in a rebuild, not even thinking about it, and you figure out the rest of your roster, because it really only takes 3 or 4 guys. You mentioned, I mean, I had some teams with Josh Allen plus Justin Jefferson plus one other guy, and it's like, well, I got to buy. Like right. I was figuring out a lot of other stuff. Like you really don't have to get everything right. I think people think you need the perfect roster of all-stars and you need to hit on 7 of your first 8 picks in a startup draft or a redraft or whatever it is to get to the end. And you really don't. There's a handful of guys that truly mattered. Some of them were appropriately priced. Some of them were underpriced. But if you have multiple of those, in addition to one that was maybe completely expected and you just, I was at 106 and I drafted them, then that's it. That's the color by numbers equation to get to the show at the end.
Absolutely. I love that. And that's something that I've learned late too. Like we should do some more team building stuff in the off season specific,
I think we have time.
When the NFL season's over, yeah, we'll do some specific team building stuff. But one of the things I was actually looking at just today, I'm doing this case study for my team building guide. I went through and I looked at a team and I drafted, I waited until 9-12 to draft a wide receiver. It was Brandon Cooks. I think it was wide receiver like 40, maybe something like that, 39, 40, something like that. My best wide receiver on my team was actually Gabe Davis for the season, and he finished as wide receiver 33 in the format. I ended up finishing in terms of actual average points, right? That's the best that I had was Gabe Davis as wide receiver 33. In terms of average points per start, right? If you're putting guys in your lineup, right? How many times do you actually put a wide receiver in your lineup and how many points do they average? I was 7th, right? I averaged basically I was right in the middle. Yep. And you know what? I waited 100 picks to draft a guy and I ended up right in the middle. And you want to know what? Just douse the rest of the league on fire because I had spent 8-9 rounds drafting elite quarterbacks, drafting elite tight ends. Like it was a spot where with basically 2 7th-round picks and a future first, I got Jacobs and McCaffrey, right? It was just not fair, right? And so, but what the edge that I've identified is that it doesn't matter how many wide receiver points you score. It matters how many points that you average when you put them in your lineup. Right. Because where a lot of the edges lie, right? People are so enamored by getting depth at wide receiver. And I need to get young wide receivers and I need to get long-term longevity at wide receivers. And I need to
4 upside guys and then 2 rookies. And then I need all this stuff.
Right. But what you realize is that that doesn't correlate to success.
It leads to confusion for lineups is what it
absolutely
leads to.
Absolutely. And it leads to
because when you're forced into a corner, what do? You go out and get Richie James or Isaiah Hodgins if you need a guy.
Absolutely.
You picked up Zay Jones or what. Like the point is, though, you got in a corner, you put your claws out, and you're like, I need somebody, and that's when you go into redraft mode. Or even if you're in a redraft league and you go, Football Guys projections, help me out, right? And you go there and you go, let's look at some matchups, who's available in my league, and you do the best you can. But frankly, you'll look at some guys on your roster if you have too many wide receivers, and you're like, well, that guy, Richie James or whatever, is about the same as my last guy, and that I would have and I've held all year. But this 1 week, I can just pick him up. I might pick him up and start him for a month. Who knows?
Absolutely.
But what you're saying is it doesn't matter. Like, oh, I needed the position. And frankly, the thing I thought of, you can do your favorite activity now, which is you can do a running back to wide receiver rebalance conversion trade, or look to do that once or twice a year. And all of a sudden, a couple of years from now, you're still strong at the other positions. And yet you pivoted from super deep at running back to saying, I'll find some more guys. And then you end up getting some undervalued profiles, 1 or 2. And Gabe Davis turns into your wide receiver 4 12 months from now.
Absolutely. And you're just constantly in the market. But what people do is they put such a price on longevity and youth and sexiness and at wide receiver during Dynasty bikini season. But what you get is, when push comes to shove, it's elite guys that matter, right? So if you don't have, there's the Sam Hinkie or the Sam Hinkie, there's a Daryl Morey quote as well that says, if you don't have 2 top 15 players in the NBA, everything else you're doing is a waste of your time, right? That's very true in Dynasty, right? If you don't have 2 or 3 top 20 or 30 guys, right? 4 top 30 guys, you have to be so good and so lucky in terms of threading the needle on the variance and all the roadblocks that you'll come into later on in your roster, that it's really swimming upstream. But if you can get 2 or 3 or 4 guys that are elite, top 30 guys on your roster, they drag you so far. And that's the thing I think I've learned most in Dynasty, that I will pay. And there's literally, like, I put out on Twitter and people started sending me tweets about Mahomes trades where they thought they got enough. And I'm like, you've never pay too much for them. Never. Like I've seen, the only one I've seen is where they were traded for each other. Like those types of trades are the only one where you see ultimately long-term, like it's not built on a total house of cards of needing to string together every single thing, right? You have to hit on all 4 of these picks, right? In this deal we talked about, you have to hit on all 4 of them to beat Mahomes. You know how hard that is? Right, that you're drawing like there's maybe a 5% shot that happens, and even if you hit on all of them, you need one or 2 of them to probably be elite for that to matter, right?
Because even if you put 102 at like 65%, you put 105. I can't remember what the other ones were, but like if 105 is say 50%, then you go down to 30 something. You start multiplying all those together, and you're down to like single digits.
Right. And even
that's just a hit. That's not even a high ceiling hit. So
right. And even if you take I think it's 36% hit for like a top half seasonal finish. Like that's for all 4 of them to do that, it's a 2% shot.
That's one. And that's one.
Yeah,
one hit too.
It's just so for all 4 of them to happen, it's like which is basically what you would need to have happen. It's about
you're almost hoping one is a massive hit, and you're like, maybe I could trade it for someone like Mahomes.
Right. Maybe I could add a couple first to it, and
you're making life so hard. You're like, maybe I could trade for someone like an elite quarterback type. If they get undervalued or something at some point in the future.
Yeah, but even go back to like loaded classes. Like that's the thing, we get so enamored at this point in the season where we overvalue rookie picks. Like go back to a loaded class. Like go back to that class, like the Taylor class. Like how much of that, like again, like, and it wasn't even guys that ended up being like that high, right? Where these picks would be spent on, right? The Judys of the world and the Ragers and heck, CD Lamb. Like it ended up being guys later on. It was Herbert. It was Jefferson. It was guys that, and then Burrow at the top. But like there was a whole tranche of guys in the middle of that position that ended up being, or in the middle of that round, that ended up being really struggling. And even in a class like that, what we thought was loaded, you wouldn't have, if you got that class this year, right, you would lose a deal. And even though we would have sat here at this point and thought that the round was really good.
In this episode, we went deep in terms of team building, looked at some quarterbacks coming out of Wild Card Weekend, more storylines to come from the NFL, as well as some key quarterback trades and process in terms of team building, reconstruction, and also buying and selling those profiles and the timing of said profiles heading into the offseason here of 2023. I'm Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty